At the Spaka, even sometimes people disagree, but it's a learning process. Now, history of religion, the origin of religion exists actually, that is the origin of health and religion, has been there since the ancient healers, traditional Chinese and the Ayurveda, others. It's been there before where people have been incorporating religion in health. And ancient Egypt is an example because even by 3000 BC, ancient Egypt had one of the best medical training facilities. They had technology. Egypt is the one that developed pyramids and all that. And even now, people are wondering how those pyramids were built. And they had medicine, they were practicing holistic medicine. And Hippocrates, who is the father of medicine, trained in ancient Egypt for 30 years. And there he trained in that holistic care. Although, unfortunately, when he went back to Europe, he focused more on the physical. But in actual fact, the literature tells us that the medicine in Egypt was holistic care, where they incorporated spirituality and health. Now, as Africans, we know traditional healers. Our people, by the time they come to see us, they'll tell you they went to see a traditional healer, and the healer will give you medication, give you some counseling, and say, you go and make peace with your brother, because your brother is the one messing you up. So there's an element of, even our traditional healers, there's a spiritual guidance aspect, yeah? And if you look at the Bible, the book of Leviticus, the priests actually performed public health acts. When I read Leviticus, the priest, if you had an abscess, you're told go to the priest. If you had, discharges, leprosy, you had to go to the priest. And one time, Jesus healed a leprosy patient and told him, you go and report to the priest. So it's like the priests who are offering a religious support were again somehow medical public health officers. I don't know, but there's been that connection. Now, I researched a lot. There are so many studies which show that spirituality impacts positively in healthcare. There are many. I just quoted a few, but I'll put the references at the end of this slide so you will see them. You can look at them. For example, Muela et al. 201 says, demonstrated the positive impact of spirituality on physical health and mental health. And there were positive outcomes in well-being, positive outcomes in quality of life, in coping skills, recovering from mental illness, less addictive or suicidal behavior. You can see, yeah? And others like Miller, 1999, said incorporating spiritual perspectives in secular treatment has been found to improve the outcomes for religiously oriented clients. Another study again here says, Brown et al., they did a study where they found spiritual well-being had a significant effect on anxiety and depression. And those who had higher level of spirituality had less mental illness, and more. The references are there. So now, why is this important in this forum? Majority of our patients are spiritual, believe it or not. There's a study that was done in 2020, looking at the data of those who believed in evil versus spirit versus good spirit. You find, Christians topped at 2.3 billion, that is 31% of the population. Islam followed with 24.9. The secular, agnostic, atheist, non-religious people were at 15.5%. Then the Hindus were at 15%, Buddhism 5%, Chinese traditional 5%, ethnic 3%, African tradition 1.2%. And all those people, apart from the third group who are secular, agnostic, and atheist and non-religious, who did not believe in evil or God or evil versus good, yeah? So that was the study. But now WHO now defines holistic care, addressing it to be physical, mental, emotional, and social, where it's not just the physical aspect or biological aspect, but we need to take care of the biological aspect, the social aspect. How do they relate with their friends? What kind of peer pressures do they have? What kind of support do they have? as well as psychological. How are you managing your anxiety? How is your self-esteem, stress management, and also spiritual, faith, trust, and hope in God. All those are important in the wellness of an individual. Now, interestingly, the universities recognize, we are back to ancient Egypt, 3000 BC, yeah? They are bringing in spirituality and mental health, like the Royal College of Psychiatrists. I was surprised to learn in the UK, they have courses on spirituality and mental health. There's George Washington University, I'll talk more about that. Then University of London, Heathrow. There's Durham University, Essex, Redlands, and I think there's one missing here called Duke University in the US, yeah? So what we are saying is George Washington actually introduced courses in medicine, spirituality courses in medicine as early as 1992. Then they are the ones who came up with the first fully integrated elective course where they trained healthcare providers on holistic viewpoint. And in 1996, they came up with an integrated, they integrated it in the medical school curriculum. So that's 1996, we are 2023, yeah? Now, interestingly, and it will surprise all of you, there are universities who are offering courses in witchcraft. Now, I don't know what they offer, but perhaps this is something we need to look at. Serious, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, University of Zambia, this is introduced by UNESCO, and the South African universities, but I believe there are more, yeah? Yeah, so what is all this? We are mental health workers. Majority of our patients are spiritual. Okay, let's give an example of Emma. This is a case we received. It was quite complicated, but it's not her real name. She's a 15-year-old girl who presented to hospital with self-injury behavior. She was feeling sad. She was suicidal, and she had bizarre thoughts. And her symptoms had lasted 3 days, and that happened when there was a group of revivalists who came to preach to the students. That happens in most of our schools. And in that weekend, that is when this happened, yeah? So according to her, she said she would experience herself drifting to another world. There are times she drifted into another world. She could hear voices of people talking to her like one person, would you say? The voices made her have bad thoughts and made her feel like killing her friends. And she reported that indeed she had tried to choke one girl upstairs in the dormitory, and she felt guilty about it. Then she reported hearing voices telling her repeatedly that her time of death has come and she would want to harm herself. There were times she would drift to another world and find herself in a trench. And she avoided showering because it would remind her of going to the other world. So at one time, she had an episode like a seizure, though it was not a typical, it was not like an epileptic seizure. But there were occasions that she would see a halo of light surrounding people's heads, and she did not know what it was. So although this illness presented itself suddenly in the last 3 days, she reports that she started having it when she was 3, standard 3. And she would get these episodes where she would see her soul in a jar. She looks at her soul and she sees in a jar, and that is in form of a bright yellow light. She mentioned that she could shift from different worlds, sometimes deep in the sea where it is dark. She reported hearing voices talking to her, and these voices would give her instructions to follow. And when she was taken to a different world, she could not move in that world unless the voices instructed her. She reports that she would kill her family members and friends in that world by torturing them by strangulation, and she would stab them their torsos such that their hands and legs would fall off. She said that the voices were compelling and she had been tortured by them before, where they took daggers and pierced every part of her body. Yeah? And when she would return to this world, her body would ache. Yeah? And she reported that it was now difficult to tell when she was about to go to this other world. Now, these episodes of moving to a different world subsided. They initially started when she was in school, but subsided standard 3, but subsided between standard 4 and standard 6, only to come back again. No, sorry, from 4 to 6, they were there, then they disappeared and came back standard 6 to 8. And in high school, she continued having the episodes. Now, just before coming to the hospital, her classmates told her that she had drunk jig, but she doesn't remember, and nothing happened to her. She did not fall sick. Now, we're talking to the parents. The parents say she was a normal girl, was born naturally with no complications. Her childhood was normal. However, she had previous episodes in primary school where she could get into a trance and then get suicidal ideas at night. So during the episodes, her mother could be forced to sleep with her in the bedroom. And one time, the mom was very worried because even even at night when she was with her, she actually sneaked out of the room one night, and that really worried them. They were never able to find out what was the cause of the condition, despite investigations. Otherwise, as a person, she was friendly. The teachers did not complain about her. She was disciplined. She was not on substances. The family was a happy family, although Emma was not very close to her father, apparently. And she was actually closer to her mother and oldest child in the family. Yeah, sorry. She was the oldest child in the family, and she had 2 younger brothers. But there was no family or history of mental illness or any other condition. So there was a positive family history of alcoholism in the mother's side, but no other significant history of trauma, rape, substance abuse, and any other mental illness. The teachers liked her. It's just that she was no longer so active in games. She had really changed. They were concerned, but she generally liked her. So when I examined her, I found she was quite depressed. She spoke slowly. She had good eye contact, and she was talking about seeing colors. She would see halos around us, halos around us, different colors, and she could hear voices on and off talking to her. Yeah, and she needed to kill. The voices would tell her, I believe they could have been command hallucinations, yeah, to do this and do that, to kill people or harm people, instructing her to do harm to herself or family members. Her cognitive function was very normal. She had insight. She knew there was a problem, and she knew she was in the hospital for help, and she was cooperative. Psychologically, the test basically showed she had some low anxiety, and she had moderate to severe depression, but there was no other abnormal finding in the psychological screening. The psychologist, though, okay, what I came up with a tentative diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, and then perhaps a partial seizure or temporal lobe or dissociative state. Those were the first 3 conditions I was thinking of. So all the tests were done and they were normal. The psychologist, we were talking about a dissociative state. Normally when a young person is traumatized for some reason or going through a difficult time, they can go through a state where there's a disruption and breakdown of memory, awareness, identity, perception, and they can have such episodes, yeah? But her memory was quite intact, and she did not have any trauma that she reported other than the experiences she was getting. There was no physical trauma. She did not have blurred sense of identity. Nevertheless, I decided to treat her, treat the depression and anxiety. I put her on appetizer, and I started with olanzapine, but with the neuroleptics, she just got worse. And I didn't see ourselves moving forward with the neuroleptics. So I decided to put her on, I stopped that and put her on anti-epileptic, really Tegretol, kind of a therapeutic trial just to see if that should change anything. And it didn't. But at the same time, she was getting other parts of holistic care, beadwork, psychotherapy for insight, psychoeducation, past trauma, then her condition kept getting worse. But in view of the fact of the nature of the symptoms, something told me, let me refer for spiritual therapy. And then as we continue the other therapies, I did not stop the other therapies, yeah? So the spiritual therapist, Joel, had a session with her, and this is what he got now, his story. He was that Emma associated with a group in school who initiated her into an occultic group where she took some oaths. And they took blood oaths in the form of drinks. They made her stand in a triangle and light some candles all around her and made her chant certain words. She would meet with them at certain times of the day and they would chant as a group and astral project. In brackets, astral projection is whereby your spirit, your body is there, but your spirit goes somewhere, does some things, and then comes back. Yeah. So she would hear voices also giving her instructions on what to do, shift from different worlds, and sometimes dip in the sea, in the darkness, etc. So this is the story that she gave the therapist. And the mother admits that when she was pregnant with Emma, and that's something the father didn't know, she rejected this pregnancy. Kumbe, it wasn't the father's baby. And in fact, it's this first time that now she got to know, yeah? So, but the mother opened up and said, actually, this baby is not my husband's, but I felt I didn't like her in pregnancy. In this session, they discovered that Emma was a stepchild whose real father had rejected her by denying the pregnancy and refused to support it. So this caused pain to the mother during the pregnancy. That's something to note. So Emma by then was not aware until she came to hospital during a therapy session when that had to come out. Yeah. So further interview, why the therapist was suspicious, and he thought this was, well, he thought it was spiritual, or demon, you call it demon possession or spiritual, because he interviewed her and he noticed that she would talk with different voices, sometimes like a man, sometimes changed like a woman, in the presence. All interviews were done in the presence of the parents who are educated, and actually professionals. Both voices were not her normal voice. The voice would identify herself or a different name in a different time. By the way, at the time I was seeing this patient, there was a time I was away and I gave one of the doctors here, who happens to be Muslim, she saw the patient and she looks at me one day and I look at her and we're talking about Emma and she wants to tell me something. And I want to tell her that, and she tells me, Daktari, I think your patient has a demon. And then I'm telling her, and it's what I wanted to tell you, but you're Muslim, I'm Christian, and we burst out, we said, hey. Anyway, okay, but that's by the way. I wouldn't give you her name, but she's one of us. Yeah. So that's what happened during the session, and she would talk of white. That she said that she talked of white witchcraft that is good for humans, and white witches which are good at helping people. Then she talked about desiring to take blood from a human to make herself strong. And she would talk of a third eye that she can project and see the spiritual realm. Now, those of you who read about occultism, I think there's something about Illuminati. They talk about third eye and Freemason. I don't know, but that I don't know if it's the same third eye she's talking about. But she talked of a third eye. I'm about to finish. Yeah. So Emma would desire to kill someone to appease a sacrifice, and she wanted to kill her youngest brother, and she would see herself taken down to hell and given instructions to come and do certain sacrifices. So she could hear voices talking to her, not to listen to this spiritual therapist, yeah, because she could see light of God shining on his word. So she would roll her eyes and such. So there were all these bizarre manifestations. And one night, you know what happened? She woke up and tried to strangle another patient in the hospital at Oasis in the night in the same room. And the patient complained and the nurses had to take her downstairs. Then there's a night she walked downstairs. Our stairs are quite steep. 2 floors at 3 a.m. backwards in the dark. Without falling, and the nurses realized when she was already down, and they had to take her up. So So those are just some of the things. So what he said is that he had to really prepare himself to help her. Initially had to pray God to give him guidance, and then intervened, tried to identify what were the gateways. Because normally for him, he's saying that possession of this nature, they're usually openings. Occultism is one. Getting involved in idolatry and witchcraft, occultism. And by the way, a lot of our schools, it's happening. There are groups who are coming together into this kind of, there are different kinds, Ouija board, glassy, I don't know, whatever you call them. And they do certain chants and shed blood. And that's happening in our school. And as mental health people, we can't ignore it, yeah? Rejection and abandonment is also another factor he identified, because that opens something. So, the mother and child connection is very important. Because when you reject your baby, the baby doesn't even have to, somehow the child will be affected, yeah, as they grow. Then the mother side had some cultural practices which were not quite right, yeah. Shedding, mutilation, shedding, and unresolved generational conflicts. So some of those things come down to affect the children. I'm finishing. So he just basically led her through prayers and led her to renounce all these things. And she started to breathe. It was through difficulty, but with time, and her parents were there, she was able to announce the vows and covenants she made, and he had to list them one by one. And then because they were Christians, he commanded that every demonic entity leave her in Jesus' name. And so what happened, the outcome is this, that he noticed that she was seeing beings in the room, voices. She could hear voices telling her not to comply with him, but she resisted and complied. And initially she had fear, but after the session ended, she felt peaceful, and completely those hallucinations disappeared. Now, she was now able to say, Dad is loving. She was able to say, Mom will hug me. She was able to mention the word Jesus, because our experience is sometimes when somebody cannot, is in that sense, to mention something spiritual, it's hard, but she was able to mention it. And actually, we stopped the medicine. 2-3 days, we stopped the medicine. That was last year. The girl, he followed her up in their home, in the family, and the parents had to get involved to teach her to pray, to read the verses. They had to get involved. And to date, she's a brilliant girl. She's back in school. She's doing her Form 4 this year, and no medication. And that's the story. There are so many references on spirituality and health. So I don't know, but that I saw was a holistic care coming in. I believe it had a role. And I believe as mental health workers, we need to acknowledge, the role of spirituality in our patients. And even if we cannot do it ourselves, the role of chaplaincy in our hospitals is extremely important. Yeah. So thank you all. Nimemaliza.